responses, and it's just so beautiful. And I appreciate everyone for watching. I'm at over 646 as I last checked. On the KKK, history of the KKK video, it was very hard to do. It took me over 5 hours. I think it was 8 hours actually total to film, edit, and post production, everything, putting up the pictures, all of that. This is all me, everybody. From the music you hear at the beginning to the everything. I do everything, and this is all for free. It's for educational purposes. I have a strong feeling as an independent journalist and a strong drive to give people information that you may or may not know. I'm going to be going over quite a few things. Again, bear with me. And I'm going to reiterate, as a black person, I feel that you have a duty to learn these things in detail so you know the America that you were not only born into, but generations before you had to deal with, and the issues they had to deal with. So now, when this new emboldened different policies, I'd say, try to be bipartisan here as an independent journalist, but some of these things, you know, it's gonna kind of make, it's gonna be like, wait, there seems a lot like this. But anyway, let's go down the rabbit hole, people. So, I don't have many notes on this because I have a lot of prior knowledge, and most people do as well. But again, I want to nail these into the ground in 2023. The more, because we've learned more information about of the history of Americans. You've seen Scarlett Johansson speak with, I think it's Henry Louis Gates. I think that's his name. Don't quote me on that. But he was doing he was tracking the family trees of slaves and slave owners, and come to find out, yeah, certain things. So we're gonna go down a rabbit hole so we can actually really revisit these things, because if you don't know where you're coming from, you're not gonna know where you're going. So let's start this off. If we're gonna talk about the Jim Crow era, we have to start with the end of the Civil War and the 13th Amendment. 13th Amendment was passed by 1865. There were still battles going on in places like Arkansas. I mentioned this in my last video on that KKK. Please go and watch that video. When you talk about these things, and the more you learn about them, the more you see how everything followed each other. This assault on African Americans born in America, or enslaved and brought to America, is a hundreds of years saga. So when you hear the Civil War, then a Reconstruction, Jim Crow era, Civil Rights era, this is 4 generations. A good 120 years worth of history that are broken up into eras because it was that long lasting and that detrimental. Like, you can't really say, oh, this was entire Civil War. No, because America was reconstructing itself. The Civil War had destroyed places like Georgia and things of that nature. So let me not get stuck on that. Let me keep going. Many former slaves were very successful right after, during the Reconstruction, and also in the in the late 1800s, 1870s, 1880s, all the way to the 1920s and on forth, because they had skills and trades that they had learned as slaves, and they took those trades and skills and created businesses. That's how you get the Madam C.J. Walkers and the congressmen who are black. And the 15th Amendment was passed, I believe, in 1868, and that gave that meant if you were born in America, you're an American citizen. And the 14th Amendment gave you the right to vote. I believe that's how it went. If I don't, I'm sounding crazy. But anyway, so again, after the Civil War, the issue where people don't talk about it as much is that the Union Army had to stay in the South for years and years and years. So from 1860 all the way into 1877, the Union was stationed in the South, in the southern states, all across the South, to protect black people from Confederate armies and rebel armies, but the KKK still was prominent then, and their ideals were put into politics. So let's say, for instance, you're a black man, you're trying to go vote. It's 1877. They say, wait, Plessy versus Ferguson. What we're now going to say is, okay, you can hold office, you're an American, you can vote, but you have to be separated from white people. And that meant trains came later. I'm going to get there. You were considered, more of a human being if you were of mixed race. You weren't considered African American or a Negro. You're considered mixed race, mulatto, things of that nature. So you had a higher status, social status. But when we get Plessy versus Ferguson in 1896, that's where you get the famous separate but equal. Now, this lasted in the courts from 1896 until 1954. Now, again, the Civil Rights Act wasn't passed until 1963 or 64. I hope I didn't get that wrong again. I'm gonna look crazy. But that gives you the scope and the scale. So what I wanted to do today is I wanted to go from 1896 to 1954. Then we're going to jump from 1954 to 2023. And I'm going to show you how the Jim Crow era essentially tried its hardest to destroy not only the black family, not only the social image and also the world image of black people, but socioeconomical and socioeconomical ways that it sought to put whites over blacks and white Americans over all other races. Now, in 1896, during this time, there was a lot of renegade crusades of KKK or white supremacists or just crazy guys who did not want black people in office. And during this time, a lot of black people were being voted into the office because they had passed the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment. But again, even during these times, the laws are passed. It's in the books. So you get equal protection, you're an American citizen, you got all of that. But the issue was there became a narrative where it was saying, hey, too many black men are holding office. And it became a central fear that was perpetrated. I'm going to post their names of the guys who sat down and they had this meeting and they decided that we're going to publish this article painting black men as incubuses, demons who would SA or sexually assault um, sleeping women. And the pictures here, they use that narrative, and they also said they were barbaric, they were dirty, they were killers, and they wanted to take over Congress to implicate Negro Rule. This is what it was called, Negroization, Negro Rule, which meant that the white man would be under the boot of the black man. A lot of people talk about it today. A lot of people love talking about it today. Hey, what if the white people were slaves? You thought they ain't thought about that? They thought about that when the Civil War. That's what they were scared of. They knew once we gained our freedoms that we were born with, that God blessed us all with. Imagine if those people took all of this information of abuse and mistreatment and spent it on us. And then there became these stereotypes. Oh, black women can withstand more pain. And then, well, I'm gonna go there. So wait, so I went on a little rant there. All right, but yeah. So Plessy versus Ferguson. That's where you get separate but equal, and that's where the states started implementing their own laws. And the loophole that they had to jump over was, I believe it was in the 15th Amendment, where a state is not allowed to make a law that infringes on someone's rights. Paul is like, we can't say if you're black you can't do this. So we can't say if you're black you can't vote. Oh, let's pass something called the grandfather laws. So, also, wait, let's pass something called literacy tests. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Oh, poll tax. Yeah. So, black people are poor during this time, relatively. We're just starting our businesses and, Black Wall Street. I'm going to get there. We just started all of this. And they're like, how can we take it from them? If you want to vote, okay, you're going to vote for your black people. So you're going to have to know how to read and write in some states. In some other states, you're going to have to pay a poll tax. Sorry. I'm not crying. I promise. 1880s, I believe. Don't quote me on this. Don't quote me on any of the dates and stuff. I'm shooting from the hip, baby. I don't even really have my notes right now. I'm just going for the hip. But so the poll tax, and they would say, hey, you would have to pay poll tax to either vote. And if none of that will work, poll tax and the grandfather laws, which meant that if your grandfather voted, now again, this is 1870s, 1880s, 1890s. Mainly the 1890s, I believe, is when the grandfather laws were passed in certain states. Where if your grandfather voted, you didn't have to pay a poll tax. You didn't have to do the literacy test. None of that. You can just vote. But how many African Americans, grandfathers, were even alive, had even voted? Their grandfathers, they were slaves. They couldn't have voted. That's the first loophole. And if that didn't work, you know what they would do? They would either harass you, the KKK would come and burn a cross or have a cross lighting. Go watch my KKK video, which means that, hey, this is the warning. So they would light a cross on a person's yard who's trying to vote or trying to be elected into office. If that didn't work, they would even kill them, lynch them. By the 20th century, it had been over 2,500 lynchings in Mississippi and I think in the South. I'm going to just say the South. 2,500. By the 1920s, it had been over 4,000. In 40 years, 4,000 lynchings. And that's just a general number. It's an educated guess because it's so many people who were unidentified. They were past the point of recognition just for trying to vote. This is our American Jim Crow era. Moving forward. So we got the First World War, now black people, again, the Great Migration is happening. We're moving north. And also you get what's called redlining, where white home and landowners in the north, after the Great Migration, they had noticed, wait, excuse me, these black people are coming north and they're moving into our neighborhoods, especially in Pennsylvania, especially in places like Minnesota, Michigan, my home state. Black people were migrating north. They were like, we're trying to vote and they're killing us. They're burning crosses in front of our yards. They're killing our dogs. My daughter went missing. She hasn't been found. My husband fought for this war. Some Confederate soldiers, black Confederate soldiers, were even lynched. Isn't that interesting? It didn't matter. If you were trying to seek power, you had to watch your back. You had to seriously watch your back. First World War, Germany, everything, Geneva Convention, war crimes, everything, sarin gas, mustard gas, all of that happened. There were black soldiers in that war. The War of 1812, there were black soldiers in that war. Spanish-American War, there were black soldiers. Name them after the Civil War, when black people had the chance to fight for this country, they still did it. And still came home to Plessy versus Ferguson, still came home to lynchings, still came home to cross burnings, still came home to harassment, mistreatment, segregation. You get better books because you go to a white school. But here, I'm going to keep it fair, journalist. I said I was going to keep it fair, so let me try to do so. Okay? States like Texas and stuff like that, before Plessy versus Ferguson, they were having black students and white students, school and bus together, things of that nature. But the problem is that it did not last. It did not last because black people were gaining our literacy. Now it's not illegal for us to read a book. You can't kill us now for reading a book. But unfortunately, there were still people who were in the South in farming and cropping, agriculture, horticulture, were all they knew. So even after slavery, and I forgot this point, a lot of African Americans had to go back to their slave owners and barter a deal where they were either tenant farmers, where they would grow most or all of the crops and keep a percentage of it, and then the landowner would let them either rent out tools and stuff like that, and use their land, to build their shacks on to live on. Where they were sharecroppers, where they would just, they would have their own land, but they would come and farm this land, and they would take a percentage of the profits or a percentage of the crops and sell them on their own. So that was very wide across the South, and it lasted a very long time. I believe even still to this day. And the issue with that became is the 13th Amendment. Slavery shall not be legal except for punishment of a crime. So slavery nor involuntary servitude is illegal except for punishment as a crime. So that loophole had been put in there. So again, 1865. Now we're in 1954, okay? And this is the same 13th Amendment. So Brown versus Board of Education. Hey, so what we're going to do is we're overturning Plessy versus Ferguson. You know, you can't segregate people on public places. And then all hell broke loose. All hell broke loose all across America. White people lost their fucking mind. Can't do that anymore. That's where you get Ruby Bridges, you know. That's where you get George Wallace. You know, these guys who famously stood in front of the doors where a 6-year-old little girl tried to come in, and she had to be escorted by National Guardsmen. This is 1954. You know? So, during this time, you do have organizations coming forward. I believe SNCC and SCLC were there. The NAACP was as well. The NAACP, I believe, was formulated in the early 1900s to support black people in law, in cases, civil rights cases, and to make sure that we were advancing as a people and getting our justice. Because again, the court system, and we talk about this even to this day, is extremely heavy-handed on black people. And back in those days, 1954 and 1877, we saw in the Emmett Till case, just because he said, "I'll see you later, baby," or something like that. And they killed that young boy. I believe it was 1955 or 1950s, between 1955 and 1957. Don't quote me, but I believe that's when it was, because I've seen this story so many times. I've seen his face, and I'm posted up here because you gonna see it again, and it should be shown again. Every generation should know that this happened, because unfortunately, he died, and it shifted America. So the Second World War's over. You know, we got all these industries. You got the Buffalo Soldiers. You got these guys. All of this stuff. You know, and you know, this young black man is lynched in the South, and it got national news coverage. His face, I believe, was on Time magazine at that time. His brutalized face. He was castrated. His face was beaten beyond recognition. He had a missing eye. His skull was fractured so bad, he was almost unrecognizable. He was drowned and tied and strangulated with a cotton gin, and they used that to weigh him down. So that emboldened the NAACP, SCLC, SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and Student Leadership Conference. I'm supposed to hear, but that emboldened them, and it also emboldened a young preacher from Georgia, Martin Luther King, and he made it his life mission to make sure that our civil rights are honored and that there needs to be a law where you cannot deny me because of my skin color, something I have no choice, but famously said, I should not be judged by the color of my skin, but the content of my character. Dr. King, always salute. I love Malcolm X as well, you know, by any means necessary. That's where you get the Huey Newtons and the Black Panther Party, which again, this all came in response to all of this abuse. So this Jim Crow era, we've started from 1865, right? We started there. Then we got all the way to 1877. And then, now we got the Plessy Ferguson. Okay, well, you're separate but equal. It's not, so hey. Then you get the Tulsa Massacre. You get the election 1898 massacre. You get the lynchings over and over and over and over again. Over and over again. By the 1960s, like we were done. We were marching on Washington. We were protesting. It was a few different instances. I can't name them all. Honestly, the mental damage that it does watching these things, I don't even want to watch them all. I really don't. It was so many race riots, or I would say mass murders, en masse, where white people would completely flood a town, cause an insurrection, overthrow this local government, and install themselves there. These towns still exist today in places like Oklahoma, in places like Arkansas, small towns that were booming black towns that were completely destroyed, or white nationalists, however you want to say it, racists. You know, just because they were afraid of what's called Negro Rule, Negroization. The whole term Jim Crow comes from this guy Dartmouth, who was an actor, and he portrayed black people even before the end of the Civil War, or before the end of the Civil War. And he portrayed them as, nasty and stupid and jumping and dancing. It was called Jumping Jim Crow. And this era was called the Jim Crow era because it reinforced that stereotype. It reinforced it. And then you got guys like Dr. King, Rosa Parks, Medgar Evers, the 3 college students who were hunted down, murdered, and killed for going to attempt to protest, or they were going to a meeting. Here. But yeah, there were 3 college kids, one of them black, 2 of them white. And the FBI was monitoring Dr. King during this time. So again, let me stay on track here. So we're in the 1950s, late 1950s, early 1960s now. The whole country is very well aware of racism and segregation, where black kids are so poor, they're dying. Even white people were poor during this time. This is the Great Depression era too. So imagine the country being poor and also being inherently racist. I hear a lot of red pill people talking about the golden era. It wasn't no fucking golden era. Not for black people. And you want to go back to the 1950s? You crazy. You crazy. I ain't never heard of nothing so crazy. Oh, the 1930, 1940, 1950. Bro. Yeah, bread was a nickel. A hamburger was a nickel, 15 cents at most. But yeah, to get that nickel, what did you have to do? How much disrespect? How many boys were you called? Now, again, these are terms that come from slavery. These are tactics that come from slavery. Lynching comes from, I think Robert Lynch is his name. He was a writer and he wrote a book for slave owners to not only keep their slaves docile, but mentally trapped to where their confidence was indignant on you having your foot on their necks. So let's say you got a crazy slave. Look, don't kill him. Beat him within an inch of his life in front of all the other slaves. And I promise you, none of them will get out of line again. So these things are, these traumas are carried down generation. Now we get to Dr. King's. And now we get these protests. And they're spraying us with water hoses, sicking German shepherds on our children. The black protesters sent out they sent out the kids hoping that the racist and the white supremacists and the police at the time, which were all hand in hand, wouldn't sick their dogs. And maybe if we send our kids out, they're not going to hurt the kids. Shit. They sprayed the kids down. One of the Democratic lawmakers was speaking to Johnson at the time. Was like, I can't believe it, man. They done sprayed this little black girl with the fire hose. And I saw her body tumbling down the street. And he said, I can't speak anymore. This is a white man. This is what emboldened the country. In the North, the South, they knew about it. They was the main ones doing it. The North is not free, though. We got redlining. We got institutionalized racism making this come up. We got DC lawmakers putting this here, this there, this everywhere. Places like Birmingham, Alabama was a hot spot during this time, which is called the Civil Rights era, which was said to be the end of the Jim Crow era. Birmingham was called Bombingham. They called Birmingham, Alabama, Bombingham. You know why? You probably guess why. It was so many bombings in Alabama that they called it Bombingham. The church with the 4 black girls who were killed. Dr. King's, he was that in Birmingham? I'm not sure. But Dr. King was staying in a house. They had set fire to it, and it was a white man's house. They burnt the house down. Dr. King was only visiting, and luckily he had left that day. When he came back, the house was burnt to the ground. The FBI knew about it. It's the whole thing about the FBI and Dr. King. But this is the Jim Crow era, and I'm not going to focus on just one person. I'm going to talk about the entire era. So far, okay, let's recap here before I end this video. 1865 Civil War, the end of the Civil War, 13th Amendment is passed. Slavery is illegal, no voluntary servitude, except for as a punishment for a crime. So, if you were loitering, that's where that law comes from. If you were loitering, if you held a debt, a lot of slave masters would create debts for former slaves, or even if you work for them, if you used their tools, let's say you used a garden hoe. After you used that for your season or whatever, he'd come to you with the bill or whatever they had at the time. I have no idea what they used. They probably didn't use things. Things weren't written down like that, unless it was whatever. But they would come to you and say, hey, you owe me $40 for this season for that too. You'd be like, what? Or they would ask them, or they would tell them, hey, you can't use any of my tools. Well, how am I supposed to farm the land to sharecrop or tenant farm? Well, what we can do is we can loan them to you, but you're going to owe me. And if you don't pay me, that's a crime. Oh, I can't pay you, sir. Well, you're just gonna have to work that debt off. And for generations, that's what it was. So that we got that, the end of the Civil War, the beginning of the Reconstruction era. Then we get Plessy versus Ferguson, where they stamped it in. Jim Crow laws, it's in the books now. So Plessy versus Ferguson, hey, separate but equal. Black people had to sit here, 2 generations, had to suffer, and we did it. And not only did we do it, but we thrived. We thrived. And I want you to remember that. Any black person in America or anywhere around the world, you know that. We thrived during this era. They would come to our towns, they would burn them down, they would lynch our leaders, they would take our fathers, kill them, castrate them, rape our women, terrorize us, KKK. They would do all of that. But we still fought. 1954, we get Brown versus Board of Education. Hey, this segregation shit it's not fair. You're putting African Americans at a clear disadvantage. Clear disadvantage. Brown versus Board of Education. Shout out to JID. He put that in his rap. Most states didn't even honor it. So we come here to the Civil Rights era, 1954, 1963. You got Malcolm, Martin, Rosa, Medgar Evers, NAACP. More names that I'm going to post up here. They're all fighting. Let me not forget. JFK, one of the greatest presidents ever, in my opinion. One of the greatest besides Barack Obama. He was a fervent advocate for civil rights. He believed that this country, he was a Lincoln president. They were black Americans were the party of Lincoln. So we were Republicans, by the way. So JFK and Dr. King was like this, and JFK was fighting hard to try to pass the Civil Rights Act. And again and again and again and again, it was not brought to the Senate floor, and JFK was killed. Lyndon Johnson fought very hard, and I give that to him. He fought very hard, even against his friend J. Edgar Hoover, who was staging a coup against Dr. King at the time, but Johnson didn't know, because the separation of powers. J. Edgar Hoover was the first head of was the famous head of the FBI, you know. So they're staging a whole. They're trying to set up Dr. King and say, hey, what if we plant prostitutes here? Hey, we got videos or voice recordings and transcripts of him having sex with other women on the road. Blah blah blah. We can discredit him. He's considered the most dangerous Negro in America. Dr. Martin Luther King, Mr. Nonviolent himself, the most dangerous Negro in America. JFK assassinated. Now, nowadays, people are saying, oh, he would, whatever, because I don't know what the hell the conspiracy they're making up now about it. Then Lyndon Johnson, he ended up passing the Civil Rights Act. And before that, there's the March on Washington, the Million Man March, the I Have a Dream speech. I'm doing a lot of research. My brain is like overloaded. That's why I'm sorry if I go back and forth and back. Forgive me here. I'm gonna try and edit it to make it perfect. But the Civil Rights Act was passed, and then that was considered the end of Jim Crow, because you cannot discriminate against any persons, no matter the race, gender, religion, now it's sexuality, you know, so you can't discriminate based on that. Even after that, it still was not honored. Going forward, lynchings still continued until I'd say maybe the late 70s, early 80s. Maybe then. I'm unsure because as much as I'm curious, I may do a video on just lynchings and the history and get you a solid number on that. I might. But it was still going on. And if it wasn't, I tell you this much, discrimination definitely was. Let's follow me here. 1963, 1968, Dr. King was assassinated. By that time, he was fighting for sanitation workers' rights and also poor rights. He said, okay, we got the civil rights, but for hundreds of years, we have been working under the white man and for this country, and we've gotten nothing for it. We've had to work for what we have. So I say reparations now. And justice delayed is justice denied. So he said, we need to give some money to the poor people because America's the richest country in the world by this time. We have nuclear weapons. Technology is starting to be innovated and pioneered. Science is coming further and further and further and further. You know, I'm not even gonna talk about the syphilis thing in what is it, Tennessee? I'm not even gonna talk about that. But basically, America was poor, and only the very rich and the generational wealthy had the money, just like it is now. So they made the Section 8s and the food stamps. From the 70s all the way to the 80s and 90s, the affirmative action. This was put in place to give black people at least a little bit of a fair chance. And now when I say I was going from 1865 to 1870 to 1954 to 1963 to 2023, now you have an entire political base saying we need to do away with affirmative action. It's terrible. It's putting white men at a disadvantage. What? We just had, it's May 8th, 2023. Yesterday there was just another mass shooting. And he's said to be to support white supremacists. He was a white supremacist. We don't have all the information, so don't quote me. But do you see the pattern? There's been over 199 mass shootings in America this year alone. And I bet my bottom dollar, 90% of them were white supremacists or conspiracy theory idealists or KKK sympathizers. I don't have proof of this, so don't quote me. But I'm damn sure. And you go look it up for yourself. I don't mean to be yelling, and I'm very passionate about this because it's terrible. And I talk to my people and everybody's like, oh, I don't want to hear about that. You know, I don't want to talk about this. You know, that's old news. We know. I know. No, the fuck you don't. You don't understand that these ideals are still here. It's being indoctrinated into kids. You can still feel the tension. Why is that? Ask yourself. When you deny yourself this history, why is that tension still here? It ain't just because of 2016. It ain't just because of Philando Castile. It ain't just because of Michael Brown, George Floyd. Jordan Neely, I think his name is, the new guy who just got strangled out on the train. It's not because of them. It's because of 1865. The Confederacy lost. And America fucking forgave them. Nobody was charged for war crimes. None of these Confederate leaders were held accountable for their misdeeds. That's why you get the statues of General E. Lee. That's why you get the KKK. That's how you get the Bedford Forest statues that are in the Tennessee Museum. These people were criminals. They were seditious criminals who were trying to insurrect our government to keep my people who look like me, enslaved. And I say, until America eradicates white supremacy and the KKK, these white nationalist groups who have these skewed identities of American nationalism and heritage, before I end this, there are 3 ways that you can get into America or have gotten to America. You either immigrated, you're either a Native American, or you were a slave. So one of those 3 ways, you made it to America. So there is no American heritage. We are a collection of different cultures from around the world who had to teach ourselves to accept that. And until we fully accept that, this is not the land of the home of the free and the brave. This is the land of the immigrants, slaves, and natives.